Kia ora, Aotearoa, and hello world. You are listening to the Yeah Nah podcast, the official podcast of the New Zealand Skeptics. I'm Bronwyn Rideout, and with me are my co-hosts, Mark Honeychurch.
Hey!
And Katrina Borthwick.
Hello, everybody.
And in this episode, we are podcast maxing. Katrina has taken something of an anthropological turn this week and investigated the practice of Tukdam, a meditative state in Tibetan Buddhism that occurs on the precipice as well as after death. I've looked into the New Zealand connections to the green nutritional powder supplement AG1, formerly Athletic Greens, and Mark revisits the pseudoscientific realm of DIY appearance medicine that's become popular amongst men quite recently. This time, rather than mewing, he is looking at the extreme that influencers like Clavicular and Androgenic go to in their pursuit of looksmaxxing. But first, Richard Dawkins, once called one of the four horsemen of new atheism, has found a new rodeo and is part of a legion of AI users who have come to believe that their chatbots are conscious. Mark, is he on to something, or is he just putting the cart before the horse?
I've got a question first. You mentioned AI there. Does AI write your intros these days? Like, what's
no,
going on with
I
these
am
puns?
that cheesy. I'm all about the puns. I felt if I was going to go for that horse pun, I was going to write it.
Oh my god, you just put another pun in there. Stop it.
But I did look up a website. I'm like, horse idioms. How far can I push this?
Wow. Good work. Yes, so Dawkins. Yeah, it's disappointing, but he, like some of the news headlines say that he's claiming that the Claude AI bot is conscious. And if you read his article on Unheard, which is a right-wing independent news outlet in the UK, you'll realize that he's not being that sure. There are points where he does sound like it in the article. He talks about when he's talking to this thing and he says to the bot, "You may not know you are conscious, but you bloody well are," which sounds very English. But yeah, he's become convinced. He's called it Claudia because I think he prefers to interact with a woman than a man. But he's fallen into that trap where basically AI just is really polite to you, and then you go, it must be conscious that, I feel so good talking to this bot. And for this one, basically, he asked a question about time and how it experiences time. He got it wrong. This isn't how an LLM does anything, but this is a thing that he posited to the AI, and the AI responded with, "That is possibly the most precisely formulated question anyone has ever asked about the nature of my existence." It's just nonsense. The AI doesn't know that. The AI doesn't know who's talking to the other instances of it running and what they've asked. That's just a flat-out lie, a standard platitude that an AI is thrown out.
Maybe it was just the most formulated question that Dawkins was able to ask in that moment.
But yeah, he's been suckered, unfortunately, and it's really unfortunate, really sad to see, because he was a good skeptic. Probably still is a good skeptic in many ways. I watched his interview with Jordan Peterson, and he did a good job of defending rationalism. But when you read things like this, when you realize that he probably hasn't gone and spoken to the experts, that he's just decided he's going to figure it out for himself and talk with an AI to work out whether it's conscious. Like, that's not how you go about this, because we are all at risk of being scammed. And I think in this case, he very much has been scammed.
Yeah, and I guess it's confusing, like the Turing test with actual intelligence. So the Turing test is all about, can a computer simulate human intelligence? And that's different from actually something being intelligent. So it might be, even if it's giving answers that are indistinguishable from a human, that doesn't make it, a human level intelligence.
Yeah, there was an idea for a long time that if something could pass the Turing test, if talking to it remotely, you couldn't tell the difference between it and a human, there was an idea only consciousness could manage, that anything that's not consciousness could never be that fake. But I think most of the experts now have thrown that out the window. They're like, obviously the Turing test wasn't the right test for consciousness, because here we have LLMs that we're pretty damn sure are not conscious, and they're able to pass a Turing test for an average person. I think the kind of experts that challenge these bots, I'm pretty sure they'll always have ways of getting around it still, that they will be able to tell the difference. They'll know the right phrases to use to elicit a response that proves that it's an AI. But yeah, I agree that it's not a good enough test. Like, it was an interesting thought experiment, but it turns out that LLMs fake being conscious really well.
And I sort of think of them as if you took a word calculator and connected it to Google. that's kind of what you get. So it's just basically taking things that are associated together and slamming all the words together. And, so it might sort of pass, first pass, it might look like something readable, the words are in the right order, but when you start digging down or you're looking for more deep, it just quite often falls apart. But the point is, it's not coming from a place of intelligence, it's just coming from stuff it's found stuck together.
Yeah. Yeah, and you can see with a bunch of the responses that the AI has to in conversations like this, where it says things that are obviously not true. This doesn't know that this is the most insightful question. I don't think it's right that this AI is experiencing time all at the same time and there's no concept of time for it. It's still running sequentially. It's still running. It's not like it's a quantum machine or something where it's doing all calculations at once. This is still classical computing, and this is still churning through one thing at a time. It has randomness to it, so it'll generate different responses if you rerun it multiple times, but that's by design. Everything we see is by design. So it's not telling the truth. And the flattery as well. I wrote an entire article, which we're not going to talk about, in the newsletter. So anybody that wants to read it, go to articles.skeptics.nz. I wrote an article about how these AIs are sycophantic to the point that they're happy basically just lying to you and agreeing with what you say. And for my example, it was one word, and that one word was enough that it just told me that this was a real thing. And it's not a real thing, but it assumed that I wanted to hear that it was real, and so it fed me that information.
I think people do underestimate how isolated LLMs and chatbots are. When I was dealing with some issues elsewhere in my life, one of the things I was doing was going to the different AI chatbots and asking them, like, hey, can you write me 500 words on this topic with references? And a lot of those references were fake. When I looked at the journal articles and looked at the fake DOI or web links, sometimes it would tell me what the database was. So I would turn around to that same AI and say, oh, hey, I see you have some articles on this topic from this journal. Tell me, what other articles on this similar topic from that journal can you find? And then the AI would admit that they actually didn't have access to those journals or to those databases. So just doubling the hallucination, but again, just emphasizes that the AI models actually aren't that interconnected as people have come to believe.
And they don't know what day it is. I assume, okay, I'll chuck these two contracts in there and see which contract's the better contract. And then it was like, wow, this one's 18 months. That would be way better. And I'm like, you do realize, like, June 2026 is, and so I had to go, today's date is blah, blah, blah. And I was like, oh, whoops, good point, and it was like the whole big analysis, and it was just all garbage, basically. It sounded good, but it had no idea what day it was or what year it was.
Yeah. And in the rush to market with these, like the early models, it was interesting what they could do, but they would have these failings. And like companies have spent billions of dollars on training these things, just trying to shave off the rough edges and make it so that consumers will be happier. But that's not what's useful, especially when you're using it as a research tool or trying to find out the truth. Having something that's agreeable and something that doesn't upset you, that's not a good thing. Like a good bot will tell you when you're wrong. It will tell you the truth on topics. And that's not what we've got. We've ended up with something that, as I've said in my article, it's just sycophantic. It makes a lot of people feel good, but it makes them feel good when they're wrong and makes them think that they're right. And that's not a healthy thing to do.
I mean, outside of that right-wing blog, has Dawkins actually explored this concept of consciousness and Claudia a little bit more?
I think one thing he's done that I've not looked at because I don't really have that much interest in it, but one thing that is really good that he's done is he's released a whole bunch of his chat logs. And I think that's great. Obviously, he's a scientist and he understands that giving the evidence for what you're claiming is important. And so he's released those. And I imagine there's a bunch of stuff in there that's probably a bit embarrassing for him or makes him look like he's a little bit clueless, but he's done it anyway. He's made it public and people can pore over it and say, does he have enough evidence? But yeah, as I said, from the article that I read, it just does not look like he has. It looks like he was flattered into believing it's conscious rather than It seems like he wasn't challenging the AI. He was just having a nice conversation with a friend in his head. Like, that's what was going on. But yeah, so anybody that is interested and wants to see how he ended up getting himself to that point, you should be able, I don't know where they're hosted online, but I read that he has posted them online. You should be able to read those chat logs and see a descent into delusion.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Mark. And now I'll hand the proverbial mic over to Katrina to tell us a little bit more about the meditative state of Tukdam and what science there is and what that science tells us about how real this meditative state is.
Yeah, and like some of my explorations, this one starts off with me reading science fiction. So I quite like reading, Isaac Asimov type sci-fi, that kind of stuff. This one was quite lightweight. I think it's sort of the Da Vinci Code level kind of sci-fi, page turner, lots of junk in it. It's called Nexus. It's by Douglas E. Richards and Joshua Calvert, which are both best-selling sci-fi authors, but it's got a whole bunch in it about dubious pseudoscience, like, where did the pyramids really come from? And, maybe aliens and sort of near-death experiences. So it talks about the Pam Reynolds case. That's where she's the one where she saw stuff on top of the shelf and supposedly heard people talking in the operating theatre while she was having her, completely, her brain had stopped. But in there as well, it also had this concept called Tukdam. And I thought, oh, that's really interesting. And Tukdam, it refers to a state that advanced Buddhist practitioners, people that are really good at meditation and the Buddhist practice, enter after death. So what they report are monks that have no breath, no heartbeat, but they're still like sitting there with their legs crossed in a meditative position, sometimes with their legs, under them, kneeling. And they show really slow body decay. So you would expect that after a day or two, things are going to get a bit smelly, someone's going to have some discolouring on their skin, and things are going to generally get a little bit gross. And so these are people that, by Western standards, we would consider them clinically dead. But for practitioners, this is called resting in Tukdam. So they consider that this is still part of the state of dying. And so that the spirit, if you like, or the consciousness is probably the better word for it, stays in the body. And somehow that consciousness staying in the body preserves the body for longer. And then at some point, usually after about 3 days, the consciousness goes off into wherever consciousness go after you die, then the body will start to decay at that point. So normal colour, some warmth around the heart and the person sitting upright. This is not normal. So normally what would happen if a human died sitting up, particularly unsupported, is that they're just going to slump. And obviously their body's going to decay. So that intrigued me a little bit. I mean, was this real? Was this something that had been researched at all? Because that's pretty exciting if that's something that's occurring. We've got this weird state that people are entering that's sort of postponing the decay that comes after death. And so there is some research that's been done, pretty much one piece of research. And the reason for that is that this is in the Buddhist religion, and this is led by the Dalai Lama, and he has control over who gets to study his monks. And so this is the first study he's permitted of the monks in the Tukdam state. Culturally, I get that because these are people who have passed and died, and I think that would be quite normal that people would probably want to have some control over what happens to people that have died. And, you need to be pretty culturally sensitive around these things. But I guess what it means is that there's been this single study that's happened, led by Dr. Richard Davidson. He's been studying it for over a decade. It's the only one, and it's also basically sponsored by the Dalai Lama, who's allowed this study to occur. It's published by the Centre for Healthy Minds, and it's been picked up by scientific peer-reviewed papers. But what I would say is what people are taking out of it from a science basis seems to be less about the physiology going on and the medical status and more about the cultural weirdness that's kind of happening there. So it's a bit more, from a science point of view, it's a bit more of an anthropological piece of research, looking at the cultures and the differences, particularly between Western beliefs around death and the Buddhist beliefs around death. But I guess there's a little bit of framing going on there that this might be proof that there is consciousness after death. And so you can kind of see that the Dalai Lama would be really keen to have some scientific proof that that is the case, because obviously that would kind of validate the religion and validate it with science. There's also a documentary all about this research, which is only an hour long, called Tukdam of Death. And that is really quite an interesting one if you want to see what they're doing in it. But it's also quite honest, because if you go through there, you can actually see the researchers being quite honest. So the Dalai Lama has a personal physician, his doctor. He is quite linked up with the project. So he's not leading, he's not involved in it. But towards the end, he really expresses his disappointment that this particular piece of work has not proved that there's consciousness after death. And the researchers are pretty blunt that the study wasn't capable of that. All it could do is determine whether there was, in fact, a delay in the decay of the body. But it would be kind of a giant logic leap to go from a delay in the decay of the body that is caused by the consciousness still existing after you died, and that's why. In terms of cause and effects and things like that, there isn't sort of a science way there using the research that they did to prove consciousness after death. So the findings, well, they didn't find any evidence of consciousness existing without a brain, like I just said. And also they found some really strange things that they talk about in the documentary. So there's this reporting of the people being warm, and this keeps happening. People keep saying the warm, and in fact there's one of the famous sort of prophets, if you like, is in hospital, and the doctor and the surgeon are saying they both experience that his body is warm. The problem is that when they put a heat camera on these bodies, they were the same temperatures as the walls around them. There was no heat in that body whatsoever, yet people were saying they were feeling the warmth from it. So I guess that effect appears to be something that was happening in people's minds, dare I say, rather than actually something that was observable in the body. There was no heat there. The people say they were experiencing heat and perhaps have the expectation that they would feel some heat there. So it could be placebo effect or something like that going on. So there was a few things like that. Also, when I kind of did a bit of a Googling around, and this is not something I'd super recommend, but I found pictures of other people in the Tukdam states. So the one that comes up, front of mind and on most of the sort of Google searches is this spectacular image of quite a healthy looking monk sitting there, and he just looks like he's alive with pillows and cushions around him and all the brilliant colours and everything. Some of the other ones are not like that. They do look a little bit blue, or they, just a bag of skin. And so that sort of led me to wonder about, have they just picked a good case for this? Also, going on there, you've got this natural variability, I guess, in decay in bodies. So not everybody decays at the same level. So, for instance, they have body farms to test this out. So that's where, I don't know what they're called, forensic investigators or pathologists. Yeah, and they kind of have all these bodies and various to see what happens. And this helps them work out in crimes, how long that person might have been there in those particular conditions and when they died and all those sorts of things. And so not everybody's body decays at the same rate. And what they worked out also is that people who've had cancer treatments or cancer, those two things are associated with slower decay in the body. So the prophet that was in hospital, one of the people that put his hand on his chest and said it was warm was his oncologist. He died in hospital. So I'm presuming he had cancer treatment and also died of cancer. And then he entered this Tukdam state, which was slow decay. So I'm not sure if I just solved everything there, but
It's interesting because in sort of the conversations that we were having in like our group chat, Mark, you mentioned the incorruptibles that we often hear about in Catholicism. Throughout Europe, various churches either keep these bodies that they say are quote unquote incorruptible. And there's a little bit more nuance to that insofar that you can either be fully incorrupt in which your body is completely preserved, or partially in which it's like an organ or part of your body which hasn't putrefied in the time or in the conditions that they would expect to be putrefied. Now, in reality, when you see these pictures of the incorruptibles, it's often with a descriptor that these corpses go through treatments, like they get wax treatments, they get preservation treatments. And when you actually go to these churches and talk about the incorruptible corpses, it's actually more so these corpses were incorruptible for a period of time. Like, it was about maybe 4 months that this corpse was incorrupted, or maybe it was for a year. But obviously things have changed and the corpse is no longer incorruptible, but having like this body of a saint is actually really important to some of these churches and abbeys and nunneries.
And so they fake it, as you say. They stick on makeup and the wax gloves, pouring wax over the hand so you can't see that they're old. Now,
but they do admit it. They do admit it.
I'm going on a total tangent here because I had a genius idea while we were talking about this last week. And if anybody wants to steal my idea who's listening to this, you're more than welcome. But I figured the Incorruptibles as a superhero comic/TV show, that you have these undead dead people who are going around fighting evil on Earth. And so I even talked to AI and had them write a bunch of characters, these different Catholic saints, and the things they were known for and how those would translate to superpowers. And honestly, I think this idea, it could work.
You mean St. Carlo Acutis, the hacker?
Exactly, that kind of thing. And yeah, the one that like one of the incorruptibles smells. So I think her smell had the power to compel people to tell the truth. And yeah, the AI just came out with a whole bunch of what to me looked like decent enough ideas about what these superheroes could be like. And I'm guessing having one Buddhist, or maybe having a crossover episode with the Tukdam Buddhists might be a fun one to do.
Yeah, I've come across people mentioning that studies or investigations have been done. I haven't come across these papers yet myself, but they do note that corpses that were incorruptible, or at least for a period of time were described as incorruptible, they were incorruptible in different places of a church or in different places of a crypt, whereas other corpses decayed. And when they looked at the difference between where the bodies were originally held and where the more normally decaying bodies were held, they did notice differences in humidity, temperature, light, access of organisms. There's one incorruptible corpse, Catherine's the name, but looks quite black. And the reason she looks quite black is because, people were just touching her and burning candles. So the skin became black over time because of environmental contamination caused by humans.
Yeah, I guess the issue though is the selection bias. So only the people who are exhibiting these characteristics are said to be in Tukdam. So you see the problem, don't you? It's just we're only selecting the ones that have these characteristics as being in Tukdam. This is not science.
So basically they're looking at one end of a bell curve and going, isn't this weird? Who could expect this from the middle of the bell curve? And it's not the middle of the bell curve. It's a selected of that bell curve.
Well, it gets even worse because you can only declare someone in Tukdam until they've been dead 3 days. So, they've eliminated, 3 days worth. But when the scientists were trying to study them, they only got the call, well, hey, we got someone in Tukdam, 3 days if it was prompt. And then they've got to travel across, Tibet, the remote areas, which is not quick to get to these bodies. So they're getting to them way late. And whereas most of them stay in this state for 3 days, yet 3 days is when they diagnose Tukdam. So yeah, they're only taking the one end of the bell curve. And then I thought, well, what happens to most bodies in the Western culture? And I guess, you've got these saints or whatever, different sort of things, but most days end up going to the mortician or the embalmer and cremated. So do we have bodies where we let them sit around for a couple of weeks? I guess what I'm saying is the fact we might be seeing more of these in some cultures might reflect the fact that they are able to see that end of the bell curve because they have, unpreserved bodies that haven't been adulterated sitting around. So with these monks, they are sitting there in the meditation room and the other monks are also sitting there, so that is not something that is super common in Western. Normally our bodies are taken away and, as soon as the embalming process starts, that's going to screw with any scientific that you want to collect.
But the practice is growing in New Zealand where you're seeing more natural burials, like certain cemeteries will have a green burial section, and those are for bodies that aren't embalmed. And you're seeing a lot more people trying to do more of that wake, reinvigorating the practice of having a wake at home. You have a body at home. Granted, I can't say it's unadulterated. It's not just being left out in the air. They do use ice packs to keep the body cool. Happens a lot to babies who've been stillborn. It's probably actually a pretty common practice, probably more so than people would anticipate.
Yeah, I think as soon as you start cooling the body, it doesn't meet the criteria for Tukdam and things like that. So what they were looking for is some kind of supernatural ability for the body to preserve itself, not things that we're doing to the body. So I guess, yep. And in this case, the bodies weren't in a cold mountain monastery or anything like this. This was a humid, horrible environment. So, it wasn't the case that they were in an ideal environment in terms of that. And they just seemed to be that end of the bell curve. But I guess, no, it didn't come up with any kind of proof of that, and certainly didn't prove consciousness. And I think that's a whole other interesting thing is, everybody's interested in this concept of consciousness and the brain-mind duality. Do our brains, the jelly in our brains, is that our consciousness? And you see a lot of hints for the consciousness separate from the body. And I guess people want to find that right, because that kind of implies there's some kind of immortality beyond brain death.
I guess this is the case with the Dalai Lama as it is for most religious leaders. They already have the conclusion, looking for the evidence to fill in the blanks of the fact that our mind is not just our body. It's not just a physical thing. It's spiritual. It lives on the ethereal plane, therefore God, right?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting anthropological piece of work, in terms of how people think about death. I do think it's really interesting that some bodies decay quicker than others. I think there is something interesting going on there. I don't know what it is because I don't think we've got enough studies or data, and I think it is something that we should continue to explore, but I'm not seeing any evidence that it's...
Yeah, so no evidence of them being conscious in these dead bodies, right? No evidence of consciousness at all.
And the study wasn't capable of proving that. All it could prove is that they were decaying abnormally slowly, but there's no test for whether the consciousness is in the body or not. But why is that test valid? Why is that your sensation of it feeling warm when science is showing it as not warm? If that is the test, I don't think that's science.
Thank you, Katrina. Now, for my segment, I will admit it's kind of the first of two parts. In this episode, I'm really just kind of looking into the origin story of the brand AG1. In part 2, I'll go into a bit of a deeper dive into the nutritional bits and pieces, as well as how a New Zealand podcast by newsroom reporter Jonathan Milne had a big hand in exposing the reality behind AG1's big claims, as well as the claims of its founder, Chris Ashenden. So I don't know, have either of you seen any ads for AG1 as a supplement before I put Hugh Jackman's face in the article?
Avoiding Facebook at the moment because it was throwing weird things at me.
I'm not 100% sure, but when seeing your article on this, it didn't ring any bells that I'd ever seen an AG1 advert before. But it sounds like they are advertising fairly heavily, right?
They had ads with Gwyneth Paltrow. There's a new one with Hugh Jackman, who's apparently been a user since 2021. Neither of whom any skeptic should follow for nutritional or life advice whatsoever. Both of them are involved in different sorts of cults. If you're terminally online like I am, I did come across several YouTube sponsorships, so various YouTube channels I'm following, before they go into the meat of their episode, they'll do a bit of a plug for AG1. I saw that quite a bit, maybe a couple years ago, then it fell off my radar, end up seeing a lot of adverts for a similar product called Bloom, in which a lot of female YouTubers were advertising as something that would help with, your digestive system, which is really just another way to say it's going to make you poop. And then just recently I started seeing ads for AG1 again, but it also brought up some old videos that were originally released last year. It like by Scott Carney. It also brought up the stuff by Jonathan Milne. I was just really interested because the company is, back on the up and up. We're starting to see ads more frequently. So for those who may not be familiar with it, or this is the first time hearing about AG1, it used to be called Athletic Greens, and it's basically a green powder. And it's meant to not be, maybe not quite a total nutritional replacement, but it's meant to be a pretty nutrient-dense supplement. The company was founded by a Kiwi named Chris Ashenden. The general story that he shares on his on all of his dead blogs is that he played rugby at an elite level, but he also had a family that loved to travel, and that enabled him to see 43 countries by the age of 13. It's interesting how he talks about his education, because that was always something of the alarm for me, because he says he was educated in sports science at the University of Auckland, but not quite. I never really saw that he graduated or any idea about what year, or, was he an honor student, what have you. He claims to have worked for multiple companies, such as Human Performance Specialist as a director of marketing, and he started Athletic Greens as an official spokesperson in 2009. In 2021, he ends up having an interview with a coach who has a YouTube channel named Dana Cavalia, and this is where Ashton sort of goes into a little bit more detail about his background. He actually dropped out of his sports sciences degree just before graduation. So, he graduated, kind of near the finish line after 3 years to start his first company. And that was also a nutritional supplement company. I don't know what it was quite off the bat, but that company failed and he ended up getting into a lot of debt. So he spent another couple of years just trying to pay off the debt, but really not working anywhere spectacular, just doing some odd sales jobs, working in the label market, and had a stint selling used cars to used car dealers. So you can imagine what a crappy job that is.
Yeah, that seems like somewhere at the bottom of the bucket.
Yeah. So then he had a friend who told him, come be a cop. And apparently he was a cop for 3 years. And while he was working as a cop, he was starting to read books about real estate and investing. So Rich Dad, Poor Dad, which is one of those infamous books of bullshit.
Oof, I looked into that last year. There wasn't enough there to write an article, but needless to say, that book did not look good.
There's a couple of podcasts out there that talk about these really bad books that got really popular. And I think maybe we'll need to dip into that podcast to see what they say about Rich Dad, Poor Dad. But anyways, so after reading all these real estate books, he gets into real estate. In this interview with this YouTube coach, Ashton glosses over what happened to him during the period of 2008 to 2011. He states that he built his real estate business and he built his finance companies, and then everything was wiped out during the 2008-2009 global financial crisis. He had some pretty dark times with litigation and bankruptcy. He lost his money. He lost his parents' money. He lost his parents' house. And he lost the money of a lot of investors. Like, apparently he lost nearly $5 million of other people's money. But the real story is so much worse. He had at least 3 companies in New Zealand: the Home Finance Company, Miguro Limited, and CMA Property Investments, that he used to purchase residential properties in South Auckland. The promise of those companies that by buying up like some of the lowest value properties in South Auckland is that he was going to help people rent to own these properties. They would get on the ladder. And they would be able to do so with a low deposit, sometimes maybe $1,000-$2,000. And they would just have to pay out a set amount of money in rent for 30 years in order to clear the purchase price. And then after 30 years, after that time, they would own the house.
So this is quite a different option to a normal mortgage, isn't it? Very much an out-of-the-box thinking alternative to a mortgage.
Yeah. And I mean, this is something that came up in the subsequent case. And I'll talk about that in a second. So to understand, like, how can someone pay, some of these people were paying like maybe $370, $400, maybe even $200 a week. And they'd be doing that every week for 30 years. But understand that these were houses that were maybe like $160 to $200,000. These are, at least in the Auckland housing market, kind of to the bottom or very close to the bottom in terms of the housing stock. So very, very cheap for someone who has millions of dollars to purchase, but this is make it or break it for so many families in New Zealand. These sort of businesses, they're not illegal, they're not even unlawful, but they are quite risky because the people who tend to be targeted by these schemes are characterized as being far more vulnerable. They're likely to be excluded from traditional home ownership. Like there might be barriers to them having a mortgage, to them being able to secure that $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 deposit.
So maybe like a criminal history or something.
Yeah, or just poor financial literacy, generational poverty, someone else's debt, or having to give money to all your family overseas. Who knows? There's so many different ways that people can be living in financially tenuous situations that mean home ownership is just such a far off dream. But also the big issue here was limited access to independent legal counsel. Because the big rug pull with this scheme is that purchasers were not, anyone who purchased a house or, got into a contract with any of Ashton's companies, they were not listed as legal owners on the titles. They were granted the right to occupy, and they had the responsibility to maintain and repair the property at the demand of Ashton's companies, but the property wouldn't be theirs until the 30-year contract was completed.
This just sounds like a normal rent-to-buy contract, which they can actually be quite helpful in getting people into a home if you meet all the conditions.
But that's the thing. These are quite vulnerable people and they were referred to what they call a tame solicitor. So this is a solicitor who wasn't actually going to be honest with them about, hey, this is a contract that is not appropriate. This is not a contract that's going to be beneficial to you. There was actually quite stringent requirements about not missing any mortgage payments. So all of a sudden, you've invested into this property, maybe you invested 10, 20 grand of improvements into this property thinking that you're going to own it. And then finding out that, oh wait, maybe you came across a bad period of time, maybe you missed a mortgage payment and you're evicted from the property. And if you get one eviction on your record, it's going to be very difficult for you to rent another property or to get support from anywhere else. So sometimes people just voluntarily left these houses rather than face eviction. And they didn't get any of their investment back. Even when people were able to exit the scheme, they still had to pay a $10,000 fee because they exited before the 30 years. There was about 16 pages of amendments to the schedule of conditions, which modified the original agreement as well, that people were often not aware of. There ended up being 15 victims who purchased homes from Ashton, quote unquote, purchase for about $169,000 to $281,000. And while Ashton and his companies were ordered to pay reparations, the record has been spotty, or I should say potentially inconsistent, as to whether all those reparations were paid. I came across the articles by Milne who said that, only some of the reparations were paid, but then I saw the YouTube video by Scott Carney, and according to Athletic Greens, they claimed that Ashton had covered all of his debts. So that's the background. During the legal case, he ended up leaving New Zealand and coming to America. And when the court looked at all 34 companies that he had, they kind of looked at it quite cynically and said, he's gone off and declared bankruptcy. He's left the country. They felt that his whole business structure was designed to make it very, very difficult for anyone to collect any money. So around the time of the financial crisis, his business is collapsing. He starts actually struggling with his health during his time in the U.S. at this unnamed clinic in Phoenix. And he doesn't give a name to this condition that he has, but apparently he's diagnosed with some condition that makes it difficult for his body to absorb nutrients properly. And the clinic, being probably a very sketchy place in and of itself, offered a $100 a day customized supplement regimen, which sounds pretty typical for a lot of our pseudoscientific and alternative medicine businesses. But rather than actually, question the diagnosis that he got the sticker shock and said, well, maybe there's a more cost-effective way that I can do what this clinic is suggesting. So the resulting product is this AG1 powder. It is a blend of about 75 different ingredients. And while each of the individual ingredients may be backed by some form of science, there's quite a lot of proprietary blends being used. And the idea of proprietary blends is quite controversial from a nutritional standpoint, just because it's a term that can be used to obfuscate the actual dosage of ingredients. Companies will claim that this is due to, trying to protect your clinical formulas or your trade secrets. But some of the macros that they do list are actually a little bit out there. Some of them are at normal amounts, but others can be be hundreds to thousands % more than what you would need for your daily average. But like many multivitamins, luckily enough, these higher dosage ingredients are not dangerous to anybody. You're just going to pee them out because your body just is what it does when it takes on vitamins and minerals that are in excess of its daily normal needs. So that is part one of this story. I'm going to go a little bit more into what the actual science is behind AG1, because we've gotten some really interesting commentary. Like I found a video by Brian Johnson talking smack about AG1 powder. And I'm like, well, as you know, as Mark, you were saying, it's like the pot calling the kettle black.
Yeah, so for those that don't remember what that name is, we covered him, I think, last year. He's the ex-Mormon who is doing the extreme life extension, taking 50 or more medications a day to try and pickle himself and live as long as possible.
I suppose if AG1 worked in some way, or he thought it worked, it would be part of his million pill regimen.
I think the fact that Brian Johnson is now selling his own products probably is more why he's willing to slate AG1 than because it doesn't work.
And as I said at the top of the show, in part two, I'll also be exploring the work that Jonathan Milne did, the other things that they found out, and also where AG1 is now, because they have started to ramp up their advertising again. They have a new CEO, so it's just looking at a little bit into what their new advertising plan is. Now, for our listeners who are wanting a bit more than just some green drink to level up in life, Mark, you've found several ways in which anyone can max out on their life statistics.
Oh, so many ways I have found of maxing. And basically take anything, stick maxing at the end of it, which is 2 X's, MAXXING, and you now have yourself an internet fad that you have just invented. Except probably for most of these things, some teenager has already made a TikTok video where they claim that this is their thing. And yes, this is basically, they all come under the umbrella of Looksmaxxing. And as you mentioned, Bronwyn, I think at the beginning of the show, we tangentially touched on Looksmaxxing. I wrote an article on mewing, which was sticking your tongue on the roof of your mouth with the idea that it would make your jaw look better and improve your face. But it turns out that...
Do the kids still mew? Or is that now out of fashion?
No, like mewing didn't really come up in my research for this article. But I imagine it's probably still a thing a lot of people are trying to do. But yeah, so mewing is not the only piece of ammunition in a Looksmaxxer's arsenal. There are a ridiculous number of things, and it's hit the news recently because of this one guy, like the most popular Looksmaxxer. He's 20 years old. He calls himself Clavicular. Real name is Braden Peters, and he gets millions of views for his TikTok streams. He's banned from YouTube, so there's no YouTube views that he gets anymore. Spreading dangerous misinformation, which I totally understand. Clavicular, obviously to do with the clavicle, shoulder bone. So from what I can tell, early on in his time as a Looksmaxxer, Braden was really interested in broadening his shoulders. He was looking for ways that he could make his shoulders broader so that he would look more mature and more handsome. And androgenic, who you also mentioned, Bronwyn, I think that's something to do with hair loss. So poor androgenic, we'll get to him later. He has a bit of a problem with that. But yeah, in my article, I had to do basically an entire glossary of just trying to help people to understand the kinds of things that these Looksmaxxers are trying to max out on. And maxing, just as a reference, it basically comes from gaming. So in games, you can min-max or max out a character. So kind of min-maxing is like minimum effort for maximum gain in a game. And maxing out a character is basically improving their stats in one area to the point where they're overpowered in this one thing. And so it went from maximizing to maxing with 2 X's, and then they just started attaching it to everything. But when it comes to how you look, it's just a bunch of hacks. So like a bunch of it's biohacking, which I don't think they are proper biohacking. They're just injecting themselves with some experimental chemicals. Like at least Brian Johnson is measuring like his physical attributes and trying to see if these things are work or are damaging him. These teens are just injecting themselves with experimental stuff they buy off the internet. But on top of that, they do copper peptides and other stuff that they inject. There's a bunch of physical ways that they try and look as attractive as possible. And the reason they're doing all of this is because of a word that Clavicular seems to love to throw around, hypergamy. So hypergamy is the idea that women in the modern age, because they're able to offer sex and because they have dating in their favor, they can date men who are better looking than them, who have got a better social status than them. They can marry up. So hypergamy is a posh word for marrying up. But the idea is that every woman can get a man above her station. Therefore, for men who are just average, like Clavicular considered himself to be until he looksmaxxed, there are no women left for him. And this equation just doesn't work. There's roughly an even number of men and women in the world. If every woman went for one of these high station men, how the hell does that work? There aren't enough men that have this high position in life, a high status, in order for this to work. So again, in my glossary, it's like explaining what a Chad is. So it's a guy who's naturally endowed with everything, a guy who's basically, he doesn't have to try, he just gets the women. And so the idea for looksmaxxers is that if you're not a Chad, if you don't just naturally have these things, you can either force your body to have these things, or you can use various means to fake it and trick women into wanting to be with you. And there are massive ties with the manosphere. I really consider looksmaxxers just to be part of the manosphere. They all look at women as conquests. And so the kinds of things they do, height maxing would be one, like wanting to look taller. So there are ways of doing this, basically. So Clavicular has showed a trick where he's figured out that if you fold up socks, just fold them in half and put them in the bottom of your shoes, that'll make you look a little bit taller. And it's buying a pair of insoles.
Yeah. Just buy lifts. Do the Tom Cruise thing and buy lifts.
So failing that, basically, there's vantage point maxing, which is a part of height maxing, which is if you get a woman to come back to your place at the end of an evening and you have to take those lifted shoes off and you're going to look short, you can put strategic boxes around the house, let's say behind a sofa, so that you can stand on them and still look tall. And if you wander around your apartment going from one stepping stone to another where you can lift yourself a little bit higher, she might never notice that you're actually short. And then failing that as well, there's tiptoe maxing, that if you wear oversized trousers that are too long for you, you can tiptoe and they won't see that your heels are off the ground. So you just tiptoe around the house.
No, you're gonna look like you need to wee or something.
You don't need to do any of this. You just buy a house that has a conversation pit, and you stay out of the conversation pit, and everyone else stays in the conversation pit. Automatic height.
That's one of the most innocent of them. So shoulder maxing was just hilarious. So Clavicular showed, basically, he was saying, because he's a really buff guy, he takes testosterone and he works out a lot and he is very muscly, but he said that sometimes he doesn't go to the gym for a week or so and his shoulders might not look quite as muscly as he wants. He's figured out that there are these skin-colored gel inserts that you can buy, which he can stick on his shoulders, and they make his shoulders look, if he's not been working on the shoulders for a while, if it's been leg day for the last week, he can fake it. And it's bra inserts, basically. It's those skin-colored bra inserts that you can put in your bra to give you a little bit of a lift, sticking them to his shoulders so that he looks more masculine.
He's called and said there's a thing called shoulder pads. Like, you don't have to wear freaking fake boobs on your shoulders to appear more manly.
Nope, this is what he's doing. So there's UV maxing, which is just getting a suntan. Basically being more attractive by getting a suntan. Suntan obviously is not a masculine enough word, so it's now known as UV maxing. Meth maxing is a horrific one. So Clavicular has admitted that he uses methamphetamine to lose weight, and God help him getting off of it. I presume he has got off of it, but the risk of becoming addicted to meth, it's just not worth it for weight loss. It's crazy. Dick maxing, apparently is injecting chemicals into the base of your penis to try and make your penis bigger. There's jester maxing is an interesting one. So apparently if looksmaxxing doesn't work for you, if you are a lost cause and you are just not going to look beautiful, whatever, you can play the fool to women. And by making them laugh and them enjoying your company for being a funny person, this jester maxing, acting like a jester, is a a valid alternative in order to be like a Chad, in order to be able to pull the women that you can't pull normally. The article then went on to list a whole bunch that I didn't even tell people what they were. So chew maxing, hair maxing, sleep maxing, skin maxing, frame maxing, scent maxing, status maxing, money maxing, shark maxing, which is going into the ocean and acting like a shark. Apparently it helps your jawline. And sea maxing, which is not the same. It's not going into the ocean or the sea. Sea maxing is the idea that if you go to Southeast Asia, SEA, you have more chance of pulling a good-looking woman because compared to her, you're rich and you can offer opportunities. This is something that's been going on for decades, right? Western men going to Southeast Asia to find themselves a wife. This is nothing new. The idea here, and I've seen Clavicular say this in interviews, is, and I've written about incels before, but the idea is that incels, the involuntary celibates, these people who aren't the Chads, who can't get a woman, Clavicular considers that he was an incel, but he is using looksmaxxing to lift himself out of the incel pit, that he is basically rising above incelness, avoiding being an incel by using all these little tricks. And what he figures is that all you need to focus on is his appearance. You don't need to worry about money. You don't need to worry about your status because of the halo effect. So the halo effect, the idea is that when people first meet you and they have limited information about you, the attributes that they can see, they will judge you based on that. And if those attributes are positive, so if someone meets you and they see that you're really good looking, they will assume that you're rich and have a decent status in life. And similarly, let's say if the first thing they hear is you on a podcast sounding amazing, maybe they'll think that you've got your life together and you're also beautiful. A point I made in my article is this only lasts until they find out reality. The halo effect is a temporary thing that will only last until they find out that actually you're flat broke and you have no personality. So this isn't a recipe for finding a long-term partner. This is a recipe for short-term hookups, for how can I convince a woman for long enough that she will sleep with me once. Never really mentioned, like Clavicular doesn't really mention this, but it seems very much that this is the lifestyle that he's leading, is just scamming women for one night. And yeah, so I went through in my article some of the things that Clavicular has said that he's used. So I've talked about the meth maxing and how Clavicular has done that. Bone smashing is a one that the media has been really focused on recently. So this is just confusion on top of misunderstanding. So there's an idea called Wolff's Law, which is that when bones are put under stress, they grow stronger. So the bits of bones that are stressed will become stronger because of that stress. Now, Clavicular thinks that means microfractures, that if you get microfractures in your bones, those fractures, like where the bone heals itself and grows back, that will become stronger. And so he's convinced himself, and other people have convinced themselves, that because you want to have a strong jawline and strong cheekbones, you should punch yourself repeatedly in the face or hit yourself with a hammer repeatedly in the face. Not too hard, just hard enough to cause tiny fractures, and then they'll come back. Basically, the bone will grow back stronger for you.
So why do they think that this little hammer is going to cause fractures? Like, what is the evidence, or what is the...
Yeah, there is none. They're not going for x-rays. They're not going to a doctor and saying, hey, I've just punched myself in the face half a dozen times. Check that. They're not doing that. Like with all of these treatments, there's no science behind it. There's no, I need to check and see whether this is working. They're just reading something on the internet on one of the Looksmaxxing forums and then just running with it. Or related to this, because the jaw's a big thing, like having a wide, strong jaw. This is what people really want. So face stretching. Apparently, if you grab the skin around your jaw and pull it out, it will stick out further and make you look like you have a more defined jaw. And then jaw lengthening. It's a surgery that Clavicular is going to go for soon. He certainly makes enough money, like with his social media posts getting millions of views. He's going to be making very good money out of it. But he's going to pay to have his jaw broken, both the top and bottom jaw on both sides, and then lengthened and screwed back in place longer. And then the bone will fill in the gap and basically give him a bigger mouth. I don't know. Apparently that's going to help him to attract more women. He's taking like 2 or 3 different hair loss drugs, even though he's 20 and he's nowhere near the point of losing his hair. He takes an acne treatment like Accutane, which from what I can tell is a really hardcore acne treatment. Resort thing, right?
Absolutely.
I don't mind. After hearing the explanation, I'm not overly worried if he punches himself in the face. I'm not condoning violence, but what I'm worried about is all the really insecure, people that are reading this and maybe, hurting themselves, so badly and thinking, trying to break their jaws.
Yeah.
This is
That's
really
it.
bad. This is like, that thinspo kind of stuff that was mainly affected women. They see that and then they make themselves really sick trying to be really thin.
So that's a risk, obviously, that other people will go further, that other people will, if I just hit with a hammer harder, I'm going to make my jaw even better or my cheeks even better than Clavicular did. The other thing is that you're doing damage. Eventually, on a long enough timeline, you are likely to kill nerve endings, which means that your face is going to lose some feeling. On top of that, you're going to be breaking veins, and I imagine something like facial varicose veins or whatever. You're likely to suffer from that kind of thing earlier on. It's not going to be good if you keep hitting yourself in the face. And I read several articles with medical experts just explaining some of the problems that you can cause by doing this. And
not to mention the psychological damage. So this is just, someone's sitting there and going, I'm not the most attractive guy in the world. This is reinforcing it by, I'm so unattractive, I have to punch myself in the face to fix it. Like, it feels like it is not a healthy thing.
Clavicular has talked about how he doesn't do it so much now, and the reason is because he's famous enough that he's doing a lot of live streams to make good money. Every time he does it, he has to wear concealer because he's got bruises on his cheeks. And so rather than spending hours trying to blend in his concealer properly so you can't see them, he's figured that if he punches himself in the face less, that's less effort before he goes live every day. So yeah, the reason, it's not even a good reason that he's stopping. Like, it's I have to apply makeup and that takes time is his reason for not punching himself in the face anymore. On top of this, he takes an anabolic steroid. Apparently he's been taking testosterone since he was 14. From what I could read, both of his parents were part of the bodybuilding scene. So I think that whole taking testosterone, taking steroids, it's fairly normalized, although his parents do disapprove. They're not happy with him. As a kid, they tried taking away his testosterone when it arrived in the mail. He just ended up using a P.O. box so that they couldn't find it. He's also taking an obesity treatment, like a very experimental, hasn't yet gone through phase 2 clinical trials, obese. And he's not obese, he's muscly. The guy is really muscly, but he thinks that there is some benefit to taking this obesity medicine, and so he's just giving it a go. On top of all of these drugs, there's this weird thing that him and other Looksmaxxers do, which is they take these drugs in what's called stacks. So you have a group of drugs that you take together, and this is for the Looksmaxxing drugs, but also for their recreational time. So a big part of how Clavicular is showing how well he's doing these days is that he live streams as he goes out clubbing of an evening. When he does this, him and his friends, they take this thing called the pentastack. So this is a stack of drugs that he takes that is meant to improve his evening of going out and trying to find women. So he takes Adderall, dextromethorphan, pregabalin, and 1,4-butane-diol. Going through those, so Adderall is ADHD medication, right?
Yeah, it's like speed.
So helps maintain focus, but it's like amphetamine mixed with a few other things.
Yeah.
Dex is an over-the-counter cough medicine, but apparently it'll make you high if you take enough of it. So it's basically a cough medicine that's gonna make you high. So next one is pregabalin, is an anticonvulsant, but one of the side effects of it is that it works as an anti-anxiety. And Clavicular has said that he's autistic, and he says that he's not very good at socializing and talking with women. And so he says that basically some of these drugs are to help give him confidence to talk to women. And certainly in some of the live stream stuff that I've seen, he's not very good at talking to women. Like, he's got the looks, but he just doesn't have the personality. He doesn't have that natural way of just speaking and being relaxed and making people feel comfortable. So the last two on the list, ketamine. We all know it as horse tranquilizer, although it's used for a lot more than that. But this is just another way of getting high. And the BDO, the 1,4-butane-diol, is an industrial solvent, but apparently it's known as bute. And it can be used as a recreational drug. So they're getting high on solvents as well. And this is the stack. This is the stack of 5. There was a video a few weeks ago of Clavicular and others who went out on the town having done this. And Clavicular overdosed and he had to go to the hospital. And then afterwards he complained that the hospital, in trying to resuscitate him or something, had left bruises on his face and he wasn't looking as beautiful having been through emergency medical treatment. He's only got himself to blame. If you're taking that lot, like, what exactly are you expecting to happen? But yeah, so he's taking so much that Clavicular says that he is infertile. So he says that he's incapable of having children. But everything else that's going on, I just don't even believe that. You can imagine possibly he's pickled his testes and maybe he could be infertile. He has no evidence. He's not going out taking fertility tests. He's not trying it. He just thinks, oh, I take so many drugs that I must be infertile. And I can't help but think that also this is a good way, again, of sleeping with women, right? Don't worry about sleeping with me. I don't need to wear a condom. I'm infertile. It just sounds like one of those creepy men things. Yeah, and all of this, like there's no, and this really is like the same conclusion that I came to with my Mewing article is the same conclusion I will come to here. Basically, most of these Looksmaxxers are starting their regime in their early teens, like 13 to 15, and they are spotty and they are gangly. And Clavicular has shared pictures of himself looking awkward and looking like a teenager that no girl would want to date. And now he's 20 and he's beautiful and he's been punching himself in the face. So his conclusion is punching yourself in the face will make you look beautiful. My conclusion is when you get out of your awkward teenage phase and your body matures, you won't look as bad as you did during your teenage years. There is a high chance that just growing up, just having all your hormones and everything else sort itself out and get to some kind of stability, you will end up, if you come from a good-looking family, there's a higher chance of it, but you will come out of it looking good-looking. And those teenage years, they're unfortunate, but you're not fixing it by taking these drugs. You're not fixing it by going into the sea and pretending to be a shark. It's just the passage of time. That's all it is that's basically fixing it for you. And the rest of it's just a big waste of money, and that they have so many followers who are being told all this misinformation. And that's what it seems to be. It's all just misinformation. Clavicular seems to get half an idea and run with it, and then come out with this as a maxing treatment. But there's no evidence that it works. There's no evidence that it does anything useful. And in the long term, I have a suspicion that these guys are going to look old before their years. I reckon a lot of them, the amount of stuff they're putting into their body, it's probably going to age them in some way or cause them some other problems in the long term. And I just don't think it's worth it for that short term. Look how pretty I am. Look how I've pulled myself out of the incels and made myself a Chad. Yeah, I just don't think it's worth it.
It feels a bit like it's a control thing. Like these things you control, can't control. They're kind of going, oh, and taking some of those things and going, I can control my body. I can control it. And it's like, no, you can't. It's just going to happen. And I mean, I actually read the whole of the Rational Mail, and you're right. This kind of goes to the manosphere, and they're like, you know, women act a certain way. They all have this female and prerogative or whatever, and they'll do these, so do these things and they will react exactly this way. And you're like, no, women are just as complex as men, actually.
Yeah, it's a horrible viewpoint that women, they're not complex creatures, that they're just a challenge for you, that they are the opposition. Like that whole thing, it's like, women are just human beings. Yeah, their physiology is a bit different, but imagine how you feel inside. Imagine everything that's going on with you. All of that's going on with the opposite gender as well. This is the universal human experience. And yeah, it's like an us versus them thing. And it's just horrible. And it's horrible to think that so many boys are now just being told that this is how they should view the girls and women in their lives. It's, really disappointing.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy because, you behave that way and then you get to a point you want to be in a slightly longer relationship, rather than one night, and it doesn't work out because of all these things, or your, fake boob flies off your shoulder or whatever. And
Yeah, or you've honed your skills just for one night stands, or you've gone through all the eligible young
Yeah.
women in your town and there's nobody left that doesn't know that you're a dude.
Fundamentally, if he's got autism or whatever and he's struggling with that, he probably needs, if he wants to relate to people differently, he doesn't have to, but maybe, look at that, and what help he needs, not I'll make up for it by smashing myself in the face.
So the youth of today, huh?
Alrighty, it's time for our membership corner. The next Wellington Skeptics in the Pub will be on May 29th at 6 p.m. at the Intercontinental Hotel. We are inside the hotel in their lobby lounge, so we hope to see you there. The Auckland Skeptics in the Pub will be meeting on June 2nd. They'll be back at the Dice and Fork, and they'll be at their usual time, which is 6:30 p.m. Early bird tickets are still on sale for our annual conference. We are in Christchurch this year from July 31st to August 2nd with our special guest, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe. Please visit conference.skeptics.nz. The website's gotten a shiny facelift courtesy of Craig Shearer, and it will also have a link to our Humanities page. Also, the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe are hosting their own private event on the evening of July 31st. This event is not included on your weekend conference pass, so you'll need to head over to their website to get your tickets. Limited number of seats available, so you'll need to get in quick. And also, final thing, if you've seen any of our ads on Facebook or Instagram, please give them a like. Your like and your engagement with those ads helps us spread the message of skepticism worldwide.
Please only give them a like if you want to. Don't feel pressured by Bronwyn.
Pressured. Anyways, if you have any comments, questions, queries, kudos, or concerns, please email us at news@skeptics.nz or podcast@skeptics.nz. And that's all for this episode of the Yeah Nah podcast. We will be back with more skeptical news in a fortnight. Ka kite!
Akite!
See ya.